All right, so as you can see from the title, I'm actually going to be talking about my initial thoughts after playing Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. So just to kind of give an introduction to myself, I do play games on Twitch, AussieDog23. I'll probably put a link somewhere in the description for that. And I've played a bit of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth on Twitch, but otherwise it's something that I've mostly chosen to play for myself to just experience the story for myself, especially with my history with the original Final Fantasy VII and then Final Fantasy VII Remake, which came out in 2020. So to kind of go over my history, the original Final Fantasy VII, which I think came out in 1997, not entirely sure, but that doesn't really particularly matter. I know for a lot of people, they do consider it to be like their number one RPG game, especially of all time. And when you look at lists, Final Fantasy VII constantly tops the list for music, story, so many elements. So when, I think it was back in 2015 when they initially announced that they were going to do Final Fantasy VII Remake, there was a lot of hype, expectations around it. And to give my brief thoughts about Remake, which came out in 2020, huge fan of it. It was actually a big reason that I got PS4 again. And also Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is why I got PS5 this year, primarily. But brief thoughts about Remake back in 2020. Top tier, pretty much loved everything about it. It was kind of an adjustment since obviously it's only a part of Final Fantasy VII, specifically the Midgar section. Now Midgar is, massively expanded, whereas in the original it's just part of Disc 1, and in Remake it's the entire section is Midgar, just massively expanded. But it ended approximately where you leave Shinra, make it to the world map. So that was definitely something very different about Remake. Now Rebirth, a whole other scale because it's not the entire world map, but much more expanded. So Junon, Corel, Golden Saucer, all those classic locations that you probably remember from the OG game. So going into Rebirth, again, I was kind of thinking, well, how are they going to do this? Just because Midgar itself was pretty ambitious, but the entire world map, like how is this going to work? But I will say, once again, knocked out of the park. The world map, now keep in mind, I just mostly focus on the main story elements. There's so many, I did some side quests, but in terms of like the world map, there's so much to explore, so many side missions. Stuff that you would see in any standard modern game. So, that was pretty exciting. In terms of like traversing the environment, so with the original Final Fantasy VII, for the most part, you're controlling Cloud for most of the game. There are some sections here and there where you might take control of Tifa or Cid, whereas in this one, you still control Cloud for the most part, but there is a lot more variation. So there'll be sections where you take control of Yuffie or Aerith or Barret, and they sort of have their own ways of traversing the environment and interacting with the environment around them. So that was one neat way that they did sort of, expand from the original as well. Now, when it comes to combat, again, expanded from Remake. So a lot of it's going to be very much the same active system. So if you're familiar with Final Fantasy VII Remake, the combat's going to be relatively the same. Two things that they did switch up. Well, the biggest thing really is synergy abilities, which is basically, two characters will have like their own unique attack that they can actually do with each other. So a Cloud and Aerith combo, or Tifa and Aerith combo. So many different variations, which do add a lot of excitement to the combat that way. Also, with materia, there's going to be new materia in this one since it is, a bit further on into the game. So in terms of combat, so much more to do. There is sort of a skill tree that wasn't present in Remake that is present in Rebirth, and it's pretty standard for what you would see in modern games today. You unlock certain like experience points, certain abilities, which you then can use to unlock synergy abilities, increasing your luck, increasing your HP or MP, different things along those lines. So that is one thing that has been kind of switched up. Now about the story. Now, if you're familiar with remake, you probably remember that they did, mostly towards the beginning, it's kind of mostly sticking to the original plot, which is what most people kind of expected. But then you'll see some things here and there that are kind of mixed up a bit and not entirely right. And then towards the end, without getting into too many, and again, I'm not going to really speak about too many specific spoilers. So if you want like spoilers about like the story or anything, that's something you'll have to look elsewhere for. But to avoid getting into like specific spoilers, certain events happen that don't happen in the original game, which get you questioning, well, why are things switched up this time? Like, what's happening? And that's going to be the same thing with Rebirth as well. So Rebirth ends around the same point where Disc 1 ends from the original. If you remember, the original did have Disc 1, Disc 2, Disc 3. So Rebirth does end at Disc 1 after a certain iconic scene, which those of you who've played the original probably know what I'm speaking about right now. But in terms of the story, again, mostly follows the plot of Disc 1, much more expanded, like I mentioned with the world map and like side quests. But certain things happen to different characters out of order, and other things are expanded upon. Again, I'm not really getting into too many specifics here just to avoid spoilers. It is a very emotional game. Like, moments that didn't really quite have as much emotion in the original are greatly expanded upon. I'll just be bluntly honest. I did get a bit teary-eyed at some bits I didn't entirely expect to get teary-eyed at. So that was pretty exciting. I know I kind of repeated myself a lot there about things just sort of being expanded, but that's sort of the gist of Remake and Rebirth itself. It's, smaller sections of the game for like each individual game, but much more expanded. There's a lot of mini games in Rebirth, that, the Golden Saucer mini games, those are present as well. But to sort of, and I guess one other thing I'll briefly touch upon is the music. So it's going to be a lot of the same music from the original, just very much remix. So a lot of the classics like classic battle theme, classic boss theme, Genova, the different Genova remixes, One Winged Angel, Sephiroth, although much more modern. So I was definitely excited to listen to some of the newer track right there. But yeah, just sort of my ramble right there. I'm not sure how often I am going to do this whole speaking on camera thing. This might be my last time. I might expand on it further in the future. Sort of my first time doing this, so you can probably tell I'm a bit nervous, probably talking a bit too fast, trying to have some level of energy right here. But if you do happen to like suffering listening to me rambling rapidly throughout my thoughts, please feel free to leave a like, subscribe. Might determine going forward if I'm going to continue on with this or not. But otherwise, yeah, that's pretty much it. So if you did suffer your way watching through this, again, might do random topics on like horror, which you can see I'm a horror fan in the background, games, random mental health topics, whatever. But I think that's it for my ramble today. Just thank you for tuning in and have a good day.